Welcome to the Texas TribCast. I'm women's health reporter Eleanor Klibanoff, here today flying solo because Matthew Watkins, our editor-in-chief, is off at a super secret meeting, which is actually not super secret. They are in an all-day planning meeting about TribFest, which we're very excited about. He is, they're securing all those big names that you know and love for TribFest. In exciting news, this year's TribFest will be in November, which is great if you don't like being cooked to death in white canvas tents. So we are very excited about that. We released him on that, and it's very good timing because, this is finally a week of the TribCast where I get to talk about something I know about. I have been faking it for so many weeks, and now finally this is my area of expertise.
Yeah, we're actually going to interview you. So,
yeah, right. Yeah. Yes. And Matthew, he couldn't stand it. He's, usually he's the expert. He knows so much about the Texas legislature, and he said, I won't be on it if you know more than I do. So he walked off. No, we are going to do this without him today, but he will be back next week. And we don't need him because we have two phenomenal guests on, two of my reporting colleagues, sometimes reporting competitors, sometimes friends, sometimes enemies, sometimes frenemies. We've got Bayless Wagner from the Austin American-Statesman. Bayless, how are you?
I'm good, Eleanor.
Great. And Taylor Goldenstein from the Houston Chronicle.
Yes, glad to be here.
You guys are soon going to be journalistic siblings. Hearst, which currently owns the Houston Chronicle, is in
the process of closing
to buy
yes.
the Austin American-Statesman.
Yeah,
Bayless
Hearst has
knows.
bought the Statesman, but the merger is not going to be finalized with.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you
the
guys
business
are.
speak.
So we are.
Your parents are engaged to be married.
We are
but
engaged.
They're not married yet.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Well, that'll be fun for you guys to be pals instead of enemies.
For sure.
Yes,
We can
yeah.
actually finally talk and no.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to be talking about abortion politics, the guiding light in Texas politics for more than a decade. And now a very, after a very, I would say, quiet session last session, now things are really heating up again on abortion. So Taylor, maybe you can start and take us back even further to 2021, kind of 2021 to now, catch us up on, the journey to where we stand now with these abortion bans.
Yeah. So, we start with SB 8, or do you want to start there?
Yeah. Start with SB 8.
Start with SB 8 was this, kind of novel approach to banning abortion where they were able to kind of get around legal challenges by using a private citizen enforcement mechanism where private citizens could sue if they knew of an illegal abortion. And that was kind of the first foray into, massively banning abortion. And then, of course, we know in June 2022, I believe, the Supreme Court knocked down Roe v. Wade, which made it possible for Texas to pass what's called a trigger law. So they anticipated that may happen and kind of put in legislation saying, if that happens, we want to basically go ahead and ban almost all abortions except those for the life of the mother. So that's kind of where we've been at legally, leading us to this session where everything's been kind of focused on that one exception around the life of the mother.
Yeah, I always tell people the time I started at the Tribune in November 2021. SB 8 was in effect, but I was started in this very weird in-between moment where SB 8 was in effect. Abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy were banned. It was a huge deal, right? This was the first sort of workaround to ban abortions under Roe. But still, when I started in November, I think we were waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court to say whether or not SB 8 would be upheld. And I think a lot of people on all sides thought it would be struck down. It was not good law, and Roe would stop that. So when I started, they were we sort of anticipated, a lot of sources said they would anticipate it getting struck down. Mm-hmm. And then about a week later, it got upheld.
Right.
And I was oh no, I thought this
is happening.
This is happening.
Yeah.
I sort of was this is happening because we've got the Dobbs hearing and all that, but I was this is happening now.
Right.
Beat really changed.
True.
You as well.
And that mechanism lives on. I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
It's still in effect.
Yeah. And for other bills, too. That's living on. So
yes, we're finding a new uses for it every day.
Yes, it's very useful.
Yeah, so that was really interesting for me to in a matter of 2 weeks be like, oh, this is now the full focus of mine.
Right.
Yeah.
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 I can imagine that was jarring for the abortion clinics as well.
Yes.
Yeah. How quickly that all kind of
Like
coalesced.
Yeah, it was such a period of time. Really crazy. And now it feels like, well, of course it's an effect. Like
Right.
feels
This
like
is the norm.
that's not even
now.
a question anymore.
Right.
But at the time it felt very shocking.
But it
Yeah.
still interestingly causes a lot of confusion where, I'll sometimes write about the law. All abortions are banned except those to save the life of the mother, essentially, which we'll get into the language of the exception later. But people still think that it's legal until 6 weeks because that's what SB 8 legalized. They still just constantly, they don't realize that it is no longer that. Like there's a criminal penalty if you have, if you perform an abortion before 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There was a study not too long ago that people didn't even know the clinics were closed. Like there was a question and said, can you still get an abortion? People said yes.
A lot of people didn't know there's no rape exception, there's no incest exception, there's no exception for fatal fetal diagnoses.
Yeah, I think we've heard that from so many people who have needed to seek an abortion for like a lethal fetal anomaly or something like that, where they say like they didn't know until it was there, until you need it, that like there's no exception for that. And then they're convincing their family members like, oh, no. And everyone's like, oh, I thought it would deal with that. And you're like, it does not. Yeah. So that sort of catches us up to today, where abortion is banned up to 6 weeks or after 6 weeks in pregnancy through private enforcement, is banned from the moment of conception through criminal enforcement. We are going to talk about the pre-Roe ban, so just put a pin in that for now. But Bayless, talk about like what sort of what issues we've seen under this for patients and providers, and then we'll get into what the clarifying bills aim to do.
Yeah, so I think the point to start talking about this would be 20 women who had serious pregnancy complications, and 2 OBGYNs sued the state over their complications, and sort of, I think, became the biggest source of people sharing their stories of how this ban had affected them. The lead plaintiff, Amanda Zorowski, had a premature water break, and because while the pregnancy was doomed without any amniotic fluid, the fetal cardiac activity was still there. A hospital told her she basically had to wait for it to pass. And in that time, she developed sepsis, which is a life-threatening infection. And that sort of like galvanized a movement, I guess, to talk about, where is the line with the risk of death for a mother. Other women have spoken about having a diagnosis, for example, and these are, women with very wanted pregnancies. One, Caitlin Cash, who lives in Austin, had a child that had a condition that meant the bones did not develop correctly and could break within her womb, and also that it would not, the fetus would not survive. And she, under Texas law, you can't leave the state in that case. So she felt that the best decision for her family was to leave the state. She took part in the Zorowski lawsuit. There's a woman who, Samantha Cassiano, who had a child that the lungs did not develop correctly. And also, I think the brain, it was, I don't remember the name of the condition, but.
Anencephaly, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she couldn't leave the state to terminate the pregnancy. And she testified just last week, but also in this Zorowski case, about watching the baby that she gave birth to choke over the course of hours, eyes turning purple. So it's that kind of thing where, some women choose to carry those pregnancies to term, and other women feel that they want to have the choice to terminate those pregnancies. So that's aside from all the cases in which women want to get abortions for other reasons than medical diagnoses.
Right. Like the crux of the issue that we've like sort of seen emerge in the last 3 years since SB 8, certainly, but certainly since the near total ban, is like this question, right, about like when can doctors intervene? Like you said with Amanda Zorowski, and like, as you said, Taylor, like there is an exception for, the law says basically like if the pregnant patient is going to die or like suffer significant issues with like that, like long-term medical impacts because of continuing to carry this pregnancy, but the consequences are so strict, right? Like Taylor, like why are doctors why do doctors say like they're hesitating to intervene on these pregnancies?
Right. These are steep penalties, the possibility of up to 99 years in prison, revocation of your medical license, things that would basically ruin your life. So I think between the doctors and the doctors' lawyers, I think that is a huge risk to be taking when, you could gamble on like just waiting a little bit and waiting a little bit.
Right. I think like it's so funny. Like I think we hear a lot about like, waiting until the patient has like gotten to a point where it's so clear their life is in danger that now we'll act. I also feel like anecdotally, I've heard, I think sometimes doctors just acting in their own sort of like personal interest think like, well, I'll just wait, like, and then my shift will be over. And another
wow. I
doctor,
didn't even think
like,
about that.
or it's like the nurse, and like you have to get the
Yeah.
nurses on board. You have to get like the hospital lawyer. Like this is not, I think we see this as like a doctor standing there looking at a patient being like, wait till you're sicker.
Right.
But really it's like a whole apparatus.
Yes.
These are happening in hospitals. These are happening in like the state's biggest hospitals. So
yeah, and I wonder how much of it is even conscious, or if it's just like, okay, well, maybe not now, and then the next time you get to that patient,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And we've now had at least 3 stories of women. We've had 3 stories reported of women who have died due to this delayed care, which sort of brought us to this point. I mean, we've had anti-abortion groups, lawmakers, saying like these laws are clear, we don't need to clarify them. Like the doctors are if the doctors aren't acting, I remember at the Zorowski hearing, they were saying like, if your doctors aren't treating you, sue them for medical malpractice was basically the message.
Yeah.
Like
Said that
this
over
is
and
not
over.
a problem with the law. That has changed. We had 3 ProPublicas reported on these 3 women who died due to this delayed care and
and the sepsis reporting as well.
the sepsis reporting, right? This like huge increase in pregnant patients experiencing sepsis, which brings us to now. I mean, it's funny, like I think it was like November, right before the election, Brian Hughes, the author of several of Texas abortion bans, a senator from Mineola, wrote this op-ed that was like, I wrote the abortion laws, they're clear, they don't need to be clarified.
Right. Yeah.
What happened next, Taylor?
Fast forward.
Yes, right.
Record scratch, yeah.
scratch. Yeah.
Fast forward some months, and we're in the legislative session, and there's a bipartisan bill on the table to clarify the law, change some of the language to, with the intent of making it clearer and making it more possible for doctors to intervene sooner.
And Bayless, I mean, talk about this bill and what is in it and what is not in it.
Yeah, so I think the most potentially disappointing thing was that there was some talk that maybe an exception for fatal fetal anomalies when you're pregnant and the a doctor says this fetus is not going to survive would be carved out. That's not the case. What it does is it takes inconsistent language among the 3 abortion bans, 3 different laws that Texas has, and streamlines the exception for medical emergencies, where once there was language that said a woman must have a life-threatening condition that causes risk of death or serious risk of substantial loss of a major bodily function, which is word soup, as one law professor told me. Now it takes out this prerequisite that you have a life-threatening condition, so it's a truly bifurcated law. Risk of substantial loss of major bodily function or risk of death. It says that you can, doctors need not wait until the risk is imminent to intervene. It widens the definition of an ectopic pregnancy because those can be, in scar tissue, and be dangerous, not just be outside the womb and be dangerous. And it also requires that doctors get a certain amount of education on what the law says. Groups like Texas Right to Life have said that the problem for them is not that the law needed clarifying, but the doctors aren't educated on it. So, doctors generally have disagreed with that, but we'll see. And then it also has a course for lawyers that they can take.
Right. I mean, this, and, I think this is the kind of thing like we as journalists cannot hit hard enough. Is like, this does not expand who can get an abortion in Texas. It does expand, it hopefully expands who is able to get an abortion they previously qualified for,
And how quickly.
quote unquote, and how quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
The timing, I think, is the key.
Yeah, right. And it's gotten a lot of great feedback, right? I mean, we've got some very strange bedfellows on this law, right? We've got Senator Brian Hughes of, strongly anti-abortion conservative. And on the House side, we have Representative Donna Howard, Representative Ann Johnson, these like very pro-abortion, some of the most like I think outspoken abortion advocates in the House on board. Doctors groups are on board.
Texas Hospital
Association, the anti-abortion groups, like it was
Texas
feeling
Medical Association.
like we were
Yeah.
gonna have a little moment of bipartisan joy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice? That's what it was looking like.
Yes.
And then we still may, I think.
Another
but
record
there's-
scratch,
Yeah,
maybe.
another
Yeah.
record scratch. This issue has reared its ugly head about, as I was telling Bayless before this, my literal favorite thing to talk about in the entire world,
What's that?
the pre-Roe bans.
Oh, fun.
Yes, I'm
it.
obsessed with the pre-Roe laws.
Yeah.
So for brief explanation, when Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, people forget it was actually a Texas case. And so they essentially put on ice all states' abortion bans. But specifically, they were saying, Texas, your law is unconstitutional now. Texas said, okay. They did not take it off the books. They left it sitting there, but it was unenforced for 49 years. Then Roe is struck down and replaced with Dobbs, which says you can ban abortion. And the question emerged of, are those pre-Roe laws still on the books? And it only matters because these laws would allow the state to criminally penalize anyone who furnishes the means for an abortion. So groups that help people pay to travel out of state and things like that, people who help bring, are involved in abortion pills and things like that, are very nervous about those laws being put back into effect.
And critically, can I add
Please.
too, on it, unlike the most recent bans, does not have an exception for criminalizing the mother.
Yes, right, which is a huge, under Texas existing, or definitely existing
Totally.
laws,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
cannot, the person who has the abortion cannot be criminalized.
Right. And that's been a major Republican talking point. Like,
Right.
we don't want to go there.
Right.
Yes, we had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick saying that's ridiculous. Anyone who says that we would go after the mother is, the Republicans are saying that, not really Republicans, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The problem is, are the pre-Roe laws in effect? If you ask conservative lawmakers, they say yes. They are definitively in effect. We have written them into statute before. Those laws are good laws. Sorry. If you ask the other side, they say definitively they are not in effect. The Fifth Circuit, the appellate court has said that they are repealed by implication. Taylor, talk about how this is now coming into this issue.
Right. Yeah. So I think just very recently, the abortion funds have come out and said that they oppose this clarification law or these clarification laws because they believe that basically by amending that, Bayless pointed out, you have to change the definition everywhere it appears in the law. So they're going to make them all the same. That means you have to touch the, what are we calling them? Pre-Roe bans.
laws.
And by doing that, you're basically signaling to courts that we think this is in effect, because if it weren't, why do you need to amend it? So to them, that would be kind of the green light for the courts to then say that those laws are active, and it would kind of counteract their previous argument that they are not in effect.
Yeah, it's a real legal gray area. It's one of those things where each side, if you call it a legal debate, they're like, well, it's not really a debate.
Right.
And you're like, but you each have different reasons why you think that's
Right.
the case.
Yeah.
It's super complicated.
Yes.
But I love it because I
Yeah.
love unresolved legal questions.
It's one of those in the weeds things that probably the general public or reporters wouldn't even get into if it weren't the crux of the issue here. You
Yes.
have to talk about it.
Yeah. People often call these the 1925 laws, which is inaccurate.
Yeah.
This is my real bugaboo.
I thought you were going to go
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
This is my real thing. If I have one influence on Texas journalism,
Mhm.
it is people will stop calling them the 1925 laws and call
Okay.
them the 1857 laws.
Okay.
1925 is just when Texas codified its penal code. So all of our laws are 1925 laws,
Yeah.
unless they've been amended since.
Yeah.
So
Do you think there's a political aspect to that or no?
1925 objectively sounds better.
sounds
for a law
better than
Yeah.
1857.
this
We
is
got to go back to
from
1857, guys.
Victorian,
Yeah.
almost Victorian era.
no, I do think when Arizona was debating their pre-Roe statutes,
Mhm.
all the messaging from the abortion access people was very these laws existed before Arizona was even a state. These existed before the Civil War. It feels
Right.
very
Give it some context.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, I think can we talk about sort of the other side of the debate?
Yeah.
Right. So the abortion funds are very concerned that, this would make them stop work potentially because it has this language about furnishing the means for an abortion. I talked with some legal experts. One of them is Liz Sepper, a professor of law at UT. And she feels that the argument is not that strong. What she says and you already also talked to her, Eleanor, I believe.
Yeah.
But what she said is that, one, this law was only ever construed to apply in state. So, the funds for out-of-state abortions shouldn't be affected because the means for an abortion that was meant to apply to having an abortion in state, although of course it could apply to pills that come into the state. Another thing she said was that the courts have always interpreted it to not be able to be enforced. So I think, she thinks that it's sort of not a super likely chance. You would have to have a judge first find that the law hadn't been repealed. And then you'd have to find a judge that says, yes, this can be enforced out of state, which is already a whole nother constitutional Pandora's box that is, being debated elsewhere. And there's another law that would actually, codify abortion, funding abortions out of state is not law, bill, that funding abortion out of state is illegal. That's another subject.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. Like this question of is this an attempt to revive the pre-Roe laws is I think a lot of conservatives think they're already good law. We don't need to revive anything. And so if we're going to amend our abortion laws, why wouldn't we amend all of our abortion laws that are in effect?
They're not mad about it, though.
They're not mad about it. No,
Yeah.
right.
They're not saying we're open to taking that out.
Right.
Yeah.
They're trying to belt and suspenders every single time they can. Pre-Roe laws are good statute. Yeah. Even though the courts have been eh.
Yeah. But it's absolutely true that you could totally you can't rule out the possibility that they could find a way to.
Right. The clean path forward, if they were oh, no, our intent was never to revive the pre-Roe statutes, would be to repeal the pre-Roe statutes. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously not going to happen.
Happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But in talking about the Fifth Circuit, the other part of this is that, this post-Dobbs has not gone up the appellate ladder yet.
Right.
So we don't know really. We can surmise, but based on, politics, but we don't know where that case will go.
And it's
whether
those are federal courts, right? This is a state law. It's all unresolved.
Yeah.
And really, really interesting. You mentioned, Bayless, the other big bill also being carried by Senator Brian Hughes, SB 2880. That is what I believe legal experts are calling the most wide-ranging attempt yet to crack down on abortion pills and travel and all the ways Texans are sort of thwarting the abortion bans. Talk a little bit about what's in that bill.
Yeah, so according to Texas Right to Life, there are 7 enforcement mechanisms in this bill. It is a monolith. It would notably first of all, it would allow private citizens to sue companies out of state, wherever they're based, that provide information on abortion pills or provide the pills, to be mailed, which some experts or some, the American Civil Liberties Union, for example, last week were that's a First Amendment concern. Who knows? The law would make it illegal to fund an abortion or help someone get an abortion out of state, which would very clearly challenge sort of what people think, precedent on the right of people within a certain state to travel out of state for commerce. It would, I think, those are sort of the main things about it. And it'll be interesting because a judge in Alabama a federal judge just ruled that a similar Alabama law that would ban helping someone get an abortion out of state was completely unconstitutional and said, and I think this is an interesting comparison, that it would be not Alabama, Louisiana, that it would be like telling someone that it's illegal for them to go to pay for a flight to Las Vegas to gamble.
Yeah.
Because criminal laws are generally, construed to apply within the state that passes them.
Right. I think it was Alabama.
Oh, it was? Okay.
I think so. I think you were
You're
right the first
right.
time. Yeah, yeah. It's usually Louisiana. But,
Yeah.
yeah, here.
Okay. Thank you.
Taylor, what else stands out to you about this bill? I mean,
Yeah.
what are you hearing?
I think the private enforcement mechanism part is interesting too. We're seeing that come back here, where anyone who hears about really any private citizen, that could be. We've seen it a lot in spouses, ex-spouses, boyfriends, other partners, but also that could be any of your medical staff or anyone who is aware can technically file suit against you for damages.
For $100,000
Yeah,
in a lot
yeah.
of cases.
Yeah.
Like, it really is an escalation of the
That's true.
$10,000 originally.
That's true.
And one thing I forgot to mention is that it would give Attorney General Ken Paxton, notable abortion opponent, to say the least, the right to take up any case that a district attorney does not take that's a criminal, abortion case, essentially. Right now, Paxton can't just decide to take an abortion case or any criminal case. He has to be invited. So that would be a huge change.
And it would also expand the wrongful death statute, which we've already seen used. And there's been a man brought a wrongful death lawsuit against his ex-wife, saying that because she had an abortion, that he could sue for wrongful death of the child against her friends who helped with the abortion. That case sort of ended up petering out, but it does end up it's an somewhat unresolved question that this would answer by saying you can sue for wrongful death. Taylor, you mentioned the ex-spouse piece of this, and I think what we're seeing now, and what I think a lot of people who have studied pregnancy and abortion criminalization know, is that's basically how these cases emerge, right? It's a medical provider or your,
Yeah, because how do you find out about it?
right,
I mean,
your
it's
ex.
hard.
It's
Yeah.
not these local ordinances that are you can't use our roads and things like that. It's people always say well, how would they even know? How would they
Yeah.
find out? And it's you break up.
I mean,
with
unless
your,
you have one of those banners, when you're going to state, you're going to get
Yeah,
an abortion.
right.
Probably
Venmo.
not.
Just
Yeah.
married.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, probably
No,
not.
not your pharmacy.
Yeah. I mean, this bill, like you said, it faces, let's be clear, even if it passes the Senate, it faces a much harder road in the House. It also faces pretty significant legal challenges.
Yeah,
which-
wouldn't likely be, in effect as soon as it went into effect. It would be tied up in court, almost
Right.
certainly.
which doesn't seem to bother legislators that much.
That's the fun of it for them, I think.
Yeah, right. See what the courts say. And obviously, as we saw with SB 8, you just have to find the creative workaround that works. Right. So a much more abortion heavy session. We're sort of back to our old games. And an interesting sort of, to use your word, Bayless, bifurcated session of we're clarifying, we're working with these groups, we're trying to get these laws, sort of cleaned up. And on the other hand, we're also trying to crack down much more aggressively on how people are thwarting those laws.
And the politics are so interesting. I think with how much negative attention Texas's abortion ban got last election cycle, I think some people thought, and Trump, sort of trying to not talk about abortion, people thought maybe, this was being viewed as not a popular issue, not something that, politicians wanted to touch. And then I think, the SB 2880 was no, we are stepping on the gas. We are not going to let up. But I also wonder if there's part of this that is about perception. Republicans in Texas, their primary voters are generally very anti-abortion. They don't want to be perceived as supporting abortion in any way. This clarification bill could be used against them. Supporting a bill that will, unquestionably crack down on abortion, does that give them more leverage? I think I don't know if you guys have thought about that, but that's something I kind of wonder.
Yeah, definitely. I think it almost in the current, it's hard to do one without, it's hard to push for one without the other a little bit. I think it's not surprising to me that we're seeing both this effort to clarify at the same time that we're seeing this massive crackdown, I think.
Yeah, even those hearings were scheduled on the same day.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
So even physically, they're being heard together. Yeah.
Right. They're very much moving in lockstep so far. I mean, I do think the clarifying bill will have more luck in the House than SB 2880. But not to say it won't pass the House, just to say it's going to face a harder road. Just briefly to talk about this, we had a crazy day by the time this runs, 2 weeks ago, where, as you mentioned, all three of the big priority abortion bills were up in the Senate for a committee hearing. At the same time, there was a hearing in Waller County about Texas's first arrest of a medical provider after under the abortion bans. It was a midwife in Waller County who's accused of performing abortions in violation of the bans. And we got a court ruling out of New York State saying they would not honor basically Texas's legal battle against a New York doctor who is accused of mailing pills into Texas. This is all happening all on many fronts, all at once. I mean, Taylor, what's your sense of, on the AG's, on the Attorney General side, on the executive side, how they're like continuing to sort of batter this issue?
Right. I think that's kind of been their MO from the beginning is, what are the different ways we can find, in the same way we're talking about how people are thwarting the bans, they're on the other side trying to figure out, what can we do under the, constraints of the law to go after people who are still somehow, having abortions. And so this is just kind of a continuation of that.
Yeah, Bayless, what do you see in again, as we talked about, not all of these are gonna necessarily succeed in court, but what's sort of your impression of their willingness to take on these to be the first big case?
Yeah, that's the game plan. I think in abortion is one area where I think jurisprudence is so important, and so any reporter who touches on abortion is a courts reporter as well. But also with religious freedom or religious church and state issues. So I think SB 2880 is very much proof, and we'll see how much lawmakers go for it in the House, but that they want to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And I think this arrest of the medical provider in Houston, Maria Rojas, is also very much showing that they want to put some case law on the books of when this can be enforced. And in a way it's a pretty smart case because she's accused of acting as a doctor when she is not, and so even if the abortion charges don't stick, there's something they can say they want if that's if that's proven.
Right, we were talking about this just before. The judge in Waller County said basically you guys are all here very worried about the abortion piece. I'm very worried about a doctor, someone purporting to be a doctor. It's there's a couple of legal issues ensnared in this that you're right. Even if, let's say, it does play out and they're not able to pin illegal abortions on her, if you still get the headline when you arrest her, you still get the headline when, eventually if she is indicted, you get the headline, if she does get any jail time, the details matter, I think, sometimes less in these games, in these rush to get your name out there and be the first on these big charges.
Yeah, Paxton got to put his name on this one too because Waller County they're joining up, but they were able to kind of bring him in, so that
he brought them in.
Yeah, he brought them in. Yes, right. Yeah, they were
that's true, back and forth.
Right,
he brought it to them. They brought it back to him.
No, it's a great move for Paxton.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of he seems to get a lot of positive feedback when he does this. Obviously, he gets a lot of negative feedback too, but I don't know if he hears that.
Certainly. I think from the people who he needs to vote for him, I think this is a real bread and butter issue. And, as someone who is teasing a run for the Senate, I think, he's certainly trying to, do what he has continued to do, which is appeal to Republican voters. And this fits that. Yeah. Well, that was truly my favorite episode of the TribCast yet. That's it for today. You can find all episodes of the TribCast on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast on all of your platforms. If you'd like to get in touch with us, as I'm sure everyone will after this episode, lots of thoughts. We get so many. My inbox is amazing. You can reach us at tribcast@texastribune.org. Thank you guys both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob, and we will see you next week.